A few.
We have a couple schools that are going to view it over online too, okay? Again, reminder, make sure we're doing a good job, okay? We're respectful of our speakers. We'll get going in about a minute here.
All right, good afternoon. First off, I just want to tell you, make sure that we have no cell phones and distractions out. I want to tell you that our speaker today will be talking on topics that are maybe kind of serious, maybe a little bit somber. So please make sure that our behavior reflects kind of the sincerity and the seriousness of the topic that's going to be talked about. But this is a great opportunity to learn about history. Second off, the main person that our guest will be talking about, when he experienced the things that you're going to be learning about, he was your age. So if you take kind of a second to, as you're kind of learning about this, we can't possibly imagine what this person experienced in their life when they were your age. But try to empathize a little bit and imagine what these experiences looked, sounded, and felt like. And I think it's going to kind of bring you into the story a little bit more. But first off, I want to introduce our friend from the Institute for Holocaust Education, Mr. Scott Lickey. Let's welcome him, please.
Thank you. This week for us is our annual Week of Understanding. It started 16 years ago, where we would bring survivors of the Holocaust and members of our survivor community in Omaha out to schools throughout Nebraska to speak and to tell their story of survival and what happened to their families. We are now 81 years past the end of World War II and the liberation of the death camps. We're also at a point now where our survivor community is dwindling, and the ability to hear directly from a survivor is not typically possible. So we are using now what we call second generation speakers, the children of survivors, and third generation, the grandchildren of survivors. And then there are some unique experiences. People who befriended a survivor and have carried on the legacy of telling their story. And that's what Mr. Steve Goldberg is here to talk about today, his friend Abe.
Thank you, Scott. Thank you, Mr. Jones. Y'all can hear me well? Cool. All right. So I'm going to try to leave time for questions. I'm going to skip over a story. If there's time, I'll add it at the end. I'll show you. You'll see what I mean when I get there. But when you, so the second generation survivor is someone whose parents are a survivor. Third generation survivor, their grandparents. I'm an unofficial 2.5G, right? So Abe, I'm not related to Abe at all, but he came and spoke at the school where I was teaching in North Carolina. And That's my favorite picture of Abe, this wonderful smile. When you picture a Holocaust survivor, you might think of somebody who looks like that. You probably don't think of somebody who looks like that. And that's the picture that his daughter passed around at his funeral, because it really captured his joy and his zest for life, which is, considering what he went through, that's amazing. This is one of my favorite pictures of him. There's 6 candles behind him, one for each of the million Jews who were murdered during the Holocaust, and he's speaking at a military base in North Carolina. And he says there, I wish you could have met him in person. You all have pictures of yourself when you were little? Yeah? This is the earliest picture we have of Abe, because he was taken from his family at age 13, never saw his parents again. I don't think they had enough money to have a camera, but he was 17 years old and living in a displaced persons camp in Germany when that picture was taken. This is the first time he spoke about what happened to him. He was 66 years old. And I was talking with Mr. Jones, and the earlier speaker, Mr. Jones, mentioned that his father fought in the Vietnam War and would not speak about it until very late in his life, because it's traumatic to speak about things that are, war. And so my uncle also fought. He fought in the Korean War. Whenever I tried to ask him about it, he said, "No, I'm not going to talk about that." That's how Abe was until he was 66 years old. And you're going to see a clip from the interview that he gave with the first time that he spoke about the Holocaust. This is how I picture Abe, because that's what he looked like when I met him. I'm 57, going on 58, but I was 50 when I met Abe, and he had just turned 90. So I'm going to let Abe introduce himself. This is an interview I conducted with him at his home in Raleigh, North Carolina. I flew in from North Carolina to share Abe's story here. I'm originally from Newton, Massachusetts, and I was a high school teacher for about 20 years before I met Abe. So before I go any further, you should hear Abe's voice. So this is Abe Piasek introducing himself. Introduce yourself. Who are you? Where do you live today? And how old are you?
Well, how old are you? I'm 19 and a half. Yeah, my name is Abe Piasek. I was born in Poland in 1928. And I came to the United States in 1947.
And how did that happen?
That's a really long story, and a good one. After the war, during the war was bad.
So we're going to unpack the during the war was bad part. Abe spoke all over North Carolina during the last decade of his life. And that's how I met him. He came and spoke at the school where I was teaching. We became friends, and he asked me to keep telling his story. So in the Jewish tradition, there's often 4 questions are asked at a time. So this is our agenda for today is, first of all, what was the Holocaust? How did Abe and I meet? Why am I the one telling his story? And what happened to Abe during the Holocaust? And that's the really long story. That's going to be the bulk of what we do today. And yeah, it's a really long story. So, what was the Holocaust? You tell me. You guys have been studying this. What was the Holocaust? Yeah, thanks.
So, I don't know how to explain it, but like people, Germans didn't want to speak English, and how they spoke or something.
Germans didn't like Jewish people? Yep, absolutely. You want to add? Yeah, thanks.
It was a genocide on different, even blacks and also gay people in Jewish was another security.
Yeah, so it wasn't just Jews that were being persecuted and murdered. Yep. Kind of like a war. It happened in the context of World War II. Yeah. And one more. Yep.
The Jews in the war were taken to camp and tortured and stuff like that.
Yeah, exactly. Tortured and killed. All that you're saying is accurate. This is a definition. There's not one definition of the Holocaust, but this is one that I have adapted a little bit from the Holocaust Memorial Museum. This word I think is really important. It's the systematic, and we'll look at how systematic in this presentation. State-sponsored. Everything they did was legal. Just because it's legal doesn't make it moral, right? Slavery was legal in this country. Jim Crow laws, legalized discrimination against different people was state-sponsored in this country. And you all talked about like torture and so persecution and murder of 6 million Jews, but not just Jews, millions of others by the Nazis, and they didn't do it alone, they had allies and collaborators. Does that definition generally make sense?
Yeah.
Yeah? All right, so we're going to unpack that moving forward. This is where Jews lived in Europe in 1933. And Abe is one of the 3 million Jews who lived in Poland. There's another 2.5 million in the Soviet Union. It looks like there's a lot in Germany, but Germany's population was 80 million. So that's not even 1%, right? 1% would be 800,000. But the Germans had it in their minds that the Jews are responsible for all the evils that are happening to us after World War I. We need to get rid of the Jews. And there were 9.5 million Jews living throughout Europe. Back to Europe. Okay. So out of those 9.5 million, about 6 million were murdered. So we're talking 2 out of 3. All the Jews in Europe, however, were persecuted. There's a saying by Elie Wiesel, a famous Holocaust historian and scholar, that not all victims were Jews, but all Jews were victims. Does that make sense? Yeah? Okay. So how many is 6 million? When I do this presentation in North Carolina, I'll show you how it lines up with North Carolina. What's the population of Nebraska?
2 million.
2 million. So 6 million is 3 Nebraskas. That's a lot of people. When I do this in North Carolina, it would be half of our state plus 500,000, or all of South Carolina and 500,000. It's a lot of people. It's hard to wrap your mind around a number that big. A journalist named Peter Fox said if you took a day to honor each victim of the Holocaust, it would take you 16,000 years. We don't have 16,000 years, right? So we're going to focus on Abe as one story, but we're going to do so recognizing that his is one of millions of stories. Make sense?
Yeah.
All right. So one last thing, I've learned a lot. This is the 185th time I've shared Abe's story, and I've learned a lot about the Holocaust. I hate to have a graph with murders per month, but one of the things I learned was I thought there was a steady stream of killing that added to 6 million. And it turns out that's not right at all. A biologist named Louis Stone did some research, and in this period here, there's what he called a hyper-intense kill rate. And in just 3 months, in August, September, and October of 1942, 1.5 million Jews were murdered. That's 25% of the whole Holocaust for Jewish people in 100 days. That works out to 15,000 murders per day. If you do the math on that, that's 1 murder every 6 seconds, 24/7 for 100 days. That's the systematic nature of the Holocaust. The world has never seen that before. The red is the total number of murders. The green is just 3 camps in Poland. Treblinka, Sobibor, and Piagetz, and they're located here on this map in eastern Poland. I'm pretty sure Abe's mother, father, and little sister were taken to Treblinka. Again, he never saw them again after he was taken away from them at age 13, but I'm almost positive that that is where they were murdered. 99% of Poland's Jews were murdered. It says click on the link. I'm going to give you these slides when I'm done if you want to look through some of these later on. But you can see that played out here. There are no more Jews left to kill. The green is flatlined because they've killed all the Jews in Poland, with the exception of a few like Abe who were used as slave laborers. There's a bump here in 1944, and that's when the Hungarian Jews were deported to Auschwitz. Some of you may have heard of Elie Wiesel's book, Night. Yes? Not really, a little bit. That happens reasonably late in the Holocaust. And the Holocaust didn't start in 42. This is just the graph that this researcher used. If we back out, we could go all the way back to 1933 when Hitler came to power. But from Abe's perspective, the Holocaust started mattering to him when Germany invaded Poland in 1939. The Jews in his town were confined to a ghetto, and then finally he was liberated in 1945. And so his story, I think, is a really good vehicle for looking at the whole swath of the Holocaust, at least from a Polish person's perspective. It would be different for somebody from Germany, or from Greece, or from Italy. So that's the Holocaust, and that's why I think Abe's story is a good vehicle for getting into the Holocaust. How did Abe and I meet? like I said, I'm from Massachusetts originally. Abe's from Poland originally, so we have to get him to the United States. He was born in this little town here. Yeah, he was taken from his family and forced to work as a slave laborer for 2 years. So this is when he's 13, 14, 15. How old are you guys? Yeah. He then had to march 55 miles over 3 days. That's about 17, 18 miles a day. If you couldn't keep up, they had a cart on the side, and they'd say, oh, you can go on the cart and we'll carry you along. But the cart actually went out into the forest, and those people were killed. And they knew that because they'd been working as slave laborers for 2 years. The 2,000 people who did that march, almost all of them made it to a train station. Abe had never seen a train in his life. Where he grew up, there wasn't one in his hometown. And so he heard the train whistle. He turned to somebody older. He said, what was that? They said, that's a train. His first experience with a train was not a pleasant one. He was put onto a cattle car. Have you all studied that? A little bit? Yeah. So very unpleasant conditions. Each one of these red arrows is a cattle car journey. That's probably a day or two to get him to a camp called Auschwitz, which we'll talk about. That's a 5 or 6 day trip. It's not that far, but because the trains are so filled with people and they're so weighed down, you would only go about 30 miles an hour. And if there was a more pressing war need, they'd take your train and bring it off to the side and let the troops or whatever the war need was that was more pressing, that would go first. And you might sit for hours or even days at a time. So he finally got to a camp out here called Weihingen in Germany, transferred to another, each one of those red arrows in another cattle car journey. And when he was outside of a camp called Dachau, his train was bombed on either side. If the train was hit, he probably would have been killed, right? But the train hit either side of the train, stopped the train, and he went into a bomb crater. And I'll play a little bit of him, an interview with him describing what that was like, and you can watch the whole thing on your own if you're interested, which I hope you will be. When he was liberated, he weighed 75 pounds. He was 16 and a half years old. So I'm not going to show you a lot of graphic images. I am going to show you one. If you don't want a graphic image in your head, close your eyes, and I'll let you know when you can open it. Please close your eyes. That's what Abe looked like when he was liberated, right? A walking skeleton, skin and bones. That's how you're 16 and a half years old and you weigh 75 pounds. If your eyes were closed, you can open them. He spent 2 years in displaced persons camps outside of Munich. He couldn't go home to Poland. He had no family. He had no place really to go. And then he crossed, I'm going fast to get him to North Carolina. He crossed the Atlantic, settled in Connecticut, met a woman, they got married, they raised a family. He was a baker in Connecticut. We'll talk more about that coming up. And then he moved to California, where he was also a baker for about 17 years. And then he retired to Florida in 1992. And that's a picture of him from 93 with his wife, Shirley. They were married for 63 years. And that's the first time that he started speaking about the Holocaust. First he didn't speak, he just agreed to a 2-hour interview. Everything that's in purple here, I think, is incredibly brave that he did. I hope you'll take some courage from Abe's story to be braver in your life. So he was living in Boca Raton, Florida, and that's where he sat for an interview. And after he did that interview, he said, I don't want to talk about it again. But a couple weeks and months passed, and some organizations said, hey, we know you're a survivor, would you come and speak at our church, our synagogue, our school? And he said, yeah. And he started sharing his story in public, which is really hard to do, right, to confront your trauma in that way. And I don't know how many times he shared it, because I didn't meet him until 2018, but he shared it enough in Florida that he won the President's Volunteer Service Award in 2005. I'm going to guess he shared it 15 or 20 times, but I really don't know the number. And then he and his wife moved to North Carolina to be near their daughter Pam, who I'm friends with today. That's the house that they lived in North Carolina. And like I said, he shared his story all over North Carolina. This is him training teachers. This is him at a military base, and he talked to lots and lots and lots of students. And so I was teaching 11th graders about U.S. history. I was teaching 11th graders about U.S. history. I didn't know that much about the Holocaust. I thought I did, But I've learned an incredible amount in the past 6 years, and I'll share some of that with you here. So Abe came and spoke at our school. We didn't have an auditorium like this. We were a charter school. And the biggest room we had held 120 students. So he spoke to our 9th graders for 45 minutes, and then he spoke to our 10th graders for 45 minutes, and then he went home. And if you see, he's wearing a different coat. He came back and spoke to our 11th graders and our 12th graders. And he and I kind of bonded over, this is not the way to share his story. We need more time, and students need to be more prepared. And I said, I was jealous. These are 11th graders asking me questions. And I was jealous of them. I wanted to ask questions, but there was no time. I said, can I follow up? He said, sure. I said, can I have your email? And he laughed. He said, I don't do email. He gave me his phone number. So I called him, made an appointment to meet him at his house, and I interviewed him for about 2 hours. He made me some tea, and I had a big, long chronology. I'm trying to figure out which uncle and when did this happen. I was trying to get his story down. And I told people I'd done this, and they said, that's amazing. You interviewed a Holocaust survivor, right? You heard in the introduction, there are very few left today. There were a few more back in 2018, but it was a pretty rare thing. They said, did you video it? I said, no, that'd be weird. I just wanted to talk to him. They said, you're an idiot. If you talk to a 90-year-old Holocaust survivor, you have an obligation to record it. I said, you're right. So I went back. Now we've graduated to the powdered donut stage of our relationship. We're getting close. And again, I interviewed him for 2 hours. I videoed it. At the end of our session, I'm packing my stuff up. I mentioned that one of my students wanted to visit the Holocaust Museum in Washington, D.C. And Abe piped up at that, and he said, oh, I've never been. Maybe I'll go with you. Like, we've met twice, right? And so I had to check with his daughter to get permission. She said, okay. And I put together a GoFundMe to make it so his family could go for free and my students could go reasonably inexpensively. And this is local media in our area picked that up. They're going to talk about the triangle. In North Carolina, the triangle is Raleigh, Durham, and Chapel Hill. They form a triangle. So when they refer to the triangle here, that's what they mean.
Holocaust survivor living in the Triangle is preparing for a very emotional trip. He's heading to the Holocaust Museum in Washington, D.C. for the very first time. Anthony Wilson has his story and how he's educating young people right here in our area.
I really didn't want to go, but the kids are going.
That's Abe Piasek talking about his upcoming visit to the National Holocaust Museum. He shared his story of survival in the concentration camp with Johnny Kaplan and students like those in Steve Goldberg's high school class.
At the beginning it was very hard, and even today, the past 4 or 5 years, it's still a little difficult, but I have to say it and tell them what happened to a 11-year-old kid.
I mean, he's 90 and willing to talk about it, and there are very few people who meet that intersection still today. So it's an amazing opportunity.
To accompany Goldberg's class on a field trip to D.C.
It feels good somebody wants to do that, a teacher.
So we headed to the Holocaust Museum. Has anybody here been to the museum? Show of hands. It's an amazing museum if you ever get a chance to go. It was a 5-hour drive for us to get up there, so we stayed in a nearby hotel on a Saturday evening. Abe is rocking the world's best great-grandpa hat because he was there with, these are two of his great-granddaughters. And that's his daughter Pam, and that's me in the back there, and there's Abe, and then that's my students who came on the trip. We went out for pizza the night before, and that's us at the museum. And when you go to the museum, what they do is you go in an elevator up to the 4th floor, and then you see the exhibits on 4, and on 3, and on 2. It's like a big spiral. And then you exit in the lobby. And the reason the museum's set up that way, in part, is so that survivors don't have to experience the museum. They can just meet other survivors in the lobby without being triggered. Does that make sense? So we didn't know if he was going to go in or not. He met a survivor. There was another survivor who was coming, but she was late because of traffic. And he said, oh, I hear there's a cattle car on the 3rd floor. I want to see that. I turned to his daughter. I said, I don't want to traumatize your dad. Is that going to be okay? She said, I think so. It'll be all right. So we took the elevator up to the 4th floor, and then we were led by our guide down a hallway to another elevator that took us to the 3rd floor. And this is Abe with his daughter, and that's a cattle car. And Abe has not seen a cattle car in 74 years. right? He was 16 when he was liberated, he's 90, and she's holding on tight both to give him physical support so he doesn't fall, but emotional support because it's going to be really hard for him to be in the cattle car. And I've done this presentation a whole bunch. A few months ago, somebody made the comment, well, it's great that they made a replica of a cattle car. That's not a replica. They built the museum around that cattle car. That was the first thing they installed, and then they built things around that. And somebody wrote, I'm so glad you obtained an original rail car. I stood in that car and could almost feel the fear of the people that were in the car. I touched the walls and wondered who had touched the same spot as they awaited their fate. It's worth whatever it took to get it from Poland to the museum. So it's an actual car, it smells like an actual car, and we walked into it. There's a walkway that goes through the car. Abe is standing here, I'm standing next to him. His family is ringed around him this way, and my students are kind of back in here. And he starts talking for about 5 minutes. I'm not going to play the whole thing for you, but this is as we walked into the car, what Abe said.
Everybody's there? Yeah. Well, I was standing with Mr. Goldberg is standing right there. The door was shut, and we were, you can imagine, about at least between 150 to 200 people, maybe a little bit more, standing or sitting, or you couldn't lay down. And there was the only tiny window was on the side here. I was leaning on the wall, and a friend of mine was leaning next to me, and that's how it was. When they took us from one camp to another.
So he goes on, I have a website now. I didn't used to have a website, but now I do. If you go to myfriendabe.com and you click on the videos tab, you can watch the whole Abe in the cattle car video. And again, if there's time, we'll watch the chicken story, but there's a number of videos on here that you can watch, but the whole 5-minute video is linked right there. Slides are here. And I'm just going to play for you the tail end, because you'll hear his voice cracking, and again, he talks about after the bombing, people were waiting. Why couldn't they just get out of the cattle car when it stopped? Why did they have to wait for someone to open the door, do you think? Yeah. Yeah, there were soldiers waiting outside. What would they do? They would shoot him. Absolutely, yeah. You can't just walk out. So they had to wait for someone to say, it's okay, the coast is clear. They went into the bomb crater, and that's where they were given Red Cross packages. You'll hear him talk about. Some people eat the packages too quickly. If you're a walking skeleton, your system's not used to food, you're going to get really sick and you might die. And a number of people did die. You can Google that and find out about that. But this is the tail end of Abe speaking in the cattle car.
And that's how I was liberated. And from then on, it's went up and up and up. And I'm here. I didn't think I would ever set foot in a car. And my heart is pounding. I had to show you.
So after he did that, I'm an Abe Piasek fan for life. This is the other survivor who came later. Her name is Agi Giva, and the two of them were talking. And Agi talked to my students a little bit, and she said, "Do you want to see my tattoo?" And they said, "Yeah." And she rolled her arm up and showed them the tattoo on her arm. Abe doesn't have a tattoo because he was only at Auschwitz for a day, as you'll see coming up here. But the students asked Agi, "Did you go in the cattle car?" She lives in Maryland, so she's a frequent visitor to the museum. She looked at my students like they had lost their minds. She said, "No, thank you. I was on 4 of those in real life. I would never do that." She was very impressed that Abe had gone into the cattle car. So we left the museum, came back to North Carolina. I live in Durham. Abe lives in Raleigh, and that's how we met. I wanted him to tell this story. I said, "This is an amazing story. You should go out and speak at universities." He had spoken mainly in smaller venues, and when I told him that, he said, "Okay, you set it up, I'll do it." Very humble guy. And so in the summer of 2019, I got to know him better. I interviewed him a bunch, at his home. And one time I asked him what it was like to see the Statue of Liberty as an 18-year-old, and this is his description. And were you able to see the Statue of Liberty?
Yes, oh yes, lit up, oh my God. That was something. I got a picture of it.
A picture of the, wait, do you have a camera with you?
Yeah, I had a picture of it, the Statue of Liberty.
Well, who took the picture?
I forgot who, a friend of mine.
Oh, and then,
I'm not in the picture, but I saw the Statue of Liberty.
right.
And they took the picture and I got the picture of it.
Do you have the picture here?
Yeah, right here.
Okay. We get up, we walk toward his bedroom, framed on the wall every night before he goes to bed, every morning when he wakes up, he sees August 3rd, 1947, freedom for me, and he signed it his name. And he celebrated that as his personal Independence Day, particularly later in his life. In 2007, you guys weren't born, were you? No. So in 2007, before you were born, Abe celebrated 60 years of freedom. They had a party in Florida and a party in New York where his son was living. And so I was all excited for Abe to come and speak at my school. This time we're going to do a 2-hour in-school field trip just for the juniors. But that's a lot to ask of Abe. Are you up for it? And he said, yes. I'm ready. Bring it on. And so I'm doing all this research. This is the ship that brought him to the United States. That's not him on the ship, but I guess that was a popular haircut at the time. And that's the ticket that brought him to the United States. So I'm doing all this research. I'm really excited for him to speak at my school. Abe's not calling me back, which is weird, because he would call back not within hours, but within 24 hours. And so I called his daughter. I said, Pam, what's going on? She said, oh, I'm sorry, it's been hectic. I meant to call you. Abe was working in his garage, and he fell. Now, when you're 90 and you fall, it's a big deal. His head was bleeding. His neighbor had to come and punch in the code and the garage and get him to the hospital. And they patched him up, and he was doing better. And then he started talking to the nurses, saying that he was a Holocaust survivor. And they said, well, can we hear your story? And he said, sure. If you Google Abe Piasek Hospital, you'll find this story. On October 2nd, there's the TV camera, and there's Abe, and 60, 70 people are in the lobby of the hospital listening to a 90-year-old guy in a neck brace, sitting in a wheelchair, talk for an hour and a half. Because that's what he did. He thought it was important for people, particularly young people, to know about this story, about what happened. He couldn't take care of himself when he was released from the hospital, but he was feeling well enough that he was at his daughter's house, and some students from the University of North Carolina were doing a piece about the Holocaust, and this woman interviewed a number of survivors, and when she met Abe, she found that he was special.
But with Abe, he just was so honest and just told us everything. And he was the most open book, and when he told us all the stories and how sad they were, I was surprised. Like I don't know, I would have been very uncomfortable just sharing some of the stuff he shared, but you can tell that he's, told the story so many times that it's kind of like, I have a purpose now. I want to tell people, I want to tell people how bad this was so that it doesn't happen again.
And she made a great 2.5-minute video. I'm just going to show you 12 seconds of it. Spoiler alert, Abe's message was don't hate.
Don't hate anybody. I keep telling him, you don't like somebody. I don't hate. That's my motto for the kids.
So to his last breath, that's what he was all about. Sadly, his health took a turn for the worse. You all know what hospice care is? Some of you, it's like the doctors aren't trying to make you better, they're trying to make you comfortable. And it's usually when it's been determined you have less than 6 months or so to live. And so I visited Abe a few times at his daughter's house, and the last time I saw him was January 12, 2020. And he was very weak, and when I got to his bedside, he said to me, keep telling my story. Nobody's ever asked me to do that before. I said I would, I didn't know quite what that meant. 3 days later, he passed away. This is the news report from the next day. He died on Martin Luther King's birthday, January 15th. And he's buried next to his wife, Shirley, in Raleigh. And he's a Holocaust survivor who asked me to keep telling his story. And so that is the answer to question 3, why am I telling Abe's story? And now we have about half an hour to get into some of his story. Are you ready? Yeah. All right. So, most of the story takes place in Poland, and then a little bit of it, the last year or so, is in Germany. Abe grew up in this town called Białystok, and he was there for the first 14 years or so of his life. This is what it looks like today. When Abe was growing up, it was pretty similar. It was about 5,000 people, half Jewish, half Polish, and like Polish, like Catholic. And so he went back in 1991 to get a picture of his childhood home. Sorry about that. Pushed the wrong button. So this house here is where he grew up. The people weren't home when he went there, so the people next door invited them in. But he lived in that house with his mother, father, and little sister. Same house, different camera angle. And when he went back in 91, they still didn't have running water. That's an outhouse that people on that street shared to relieve themselves. And when he grew up, like there was one truck in his whole town. He'd never ridden in a truck before, and it was very much horse and buggy times. He would do fishing on the banks of that river that was in the north that you saw. And ice skating, he learned he couldn't afford 2 skates, so he had 1 skate. And it's kind of funny when he grew up, when he was teaching his kids how to skate in Connecticut, he couldn't figure out how to skate on 2 skates, so he reverted back to what he knew. He was a 1 ice skate kind of guy. And this is him describing some of the chores he did when he grew up in Poland.
I used to help out at the merchant setting up tents. A tent specifically. He used to give me a 5 groszy. It's not even a penny.
So is that what the market looked like in
Yeah.
Białystok?
Yeah.
Yeah? So you helped set up one of those tents.
Right.
I assume there was no running water?
No,
Is that how you fetch water, with the pails?
Yeah, I used to carry these 2 pails from
Yeah.
house to house. They used to give me a penny.
So Abe's helping set up the market and delivering pails. If you guys want to go to the market, you can go any day you want, right? Because we have refrigeration. If they had no refrigeration and they had no way to keep stuff fresh. So if you want market is Wednesday. If you want to get something on Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday, you're out of luck. You have to wait until market day. So that's why his job is helping to set up the market. And so he's living a basic Polish peasant's life. And in September, Germany invaded Poland. Y'all know about this a little bit? Starting in World War II in Europe. And Germany didn't really care about his little town, Białystok, but it was on the way to get to the capital of Warsaw, right? Today, Russia is invading what country? Ukraine. They want to get to the capital of Kyiv. Same thing was happening here, and Białystok is just in the way. And so when the German army came from the south, they wanted to get up to Warsaw. This bridge wasn't there, so pretend that bridge is not there. This is the only bridge in town. And the Polish army retreated north across the river and blew up the bridge so that the Germans couldn't follow them. And the reason that matters for Abe's story is the German army was stuck outside his house for a couple months until they could fix the bridge enough that they could go up to Warsaw. I'm not generalizing about the German army in general, but from Abe's 11-year-old perspective, those German soldiers were reasonably nice as conquering armies go, right? Like they came in shooting, they took over, and then Abe's family said, hey, we're hungry, can you help us get food? And they said, well, you know the area better than we do, where's the food? You point us to the food, we'll give you some. And they had a pretty good relationship. When it rained, Abe's family said, don't stay in your tent, we'll put extra hay on the ground, and some of the German soldiers stayed in their house. But then they fixed the bridge. And the Wehrmacht, or the German army, went on to Warsaw, and the SS came in and set up a ghetto. And have y'all heard of ghettos before, some of you? So this ghetto didn't have walls, but people knew if you're Jewish, you're not supposed to be outside a certain area. And if you got caught, they could kill you. But Abe's mother wanted to make mushroom soup. There was very little food at the time, and so she asked him to go pick mushrooms. He got his friend next door to go with him, and Abe was telling this story that he was accounting this at Camp Lejeune, a military base in North Carolina. And so he and his friend are out walking, and outside the ghetto, and they hear footsteps behind them. And I'll let Abe take the story from there.
I said to my friend, somebody's coming, and I think the soldiers are coming towards us. I turned around, and sure enough, and they came as close to us about 3-4 feet, and they asked me, "Kommen Sie hier, younger?" And I said, "Mr. Juden." I said, "Are you Jewish?" And I understand the word. I said, "Jawohl." So one of them took out the pistol, shot my friend in the head, and he fell down, and I ran so fast, they were shooting at me, and they didn't hit me. I was hiding in the place where I used to hide and seek. They couldn't find me.
He was like 12 when that happened to him. So when he started speaking at Camp Lejeune, he talked about how good he was at hide and seek. And I think the audience of soldiers must have thought he was crazy. They're like, we want to hear a Holocaust survivor. We don't care about hide and seek. Hide and seek saved his life. His go-to spot was under the hay, and his friends could never find him there. So he'd always win. When he's running for his life, because he just saw his friend shot in front of him, that's where he went, and he stayed there until it was dark. Goes home, tells his parents what happened. They said, "Oh my gosh, that's horrible. You better change." Because they're going to be looking for the kid outside the ghetto. If they find him, what are they going to do? Shoot him. And so he only had 2 shirts and 2 pair of pants. He put on the other shirt, the other pair of pants. His father gave him a hat, and they didn't recognize him. But Biala Brzezinski's Jews were confined in a crowded ghetto with very little food for about a year, year and a half. A mile south of Biala Brzezinski was a Polish palace. And it looked like that. Abe took a picture of it in 1991. See all those bricks? They're getting ready to rebuild the palace. The Nazis took over and turned that into like a food distribution place down here, and they slept in some of the nicer quarters up there. And so Abe went back in 96, and the palace looks great, right? They took the bricks and redid it. His house was gone. So he was lucky that he went back in 91 to see his home, because if he tried to go to see his home later, it was torn down to make a nicer home. His job at the palace, he couldn't go to school. The Jewish schools were shut down. The synagogues were closed. There was nothing for him to do. So his father said, "Why don't you come with me to the palace? They'll find something for you to do." And Abe said, "Okay." His job was peeling. He wrote piling, but his job was peeling potatoes. And he did such a good job peeling potatoes that they promoted him to take care of the chickens. We don't have time to play this story right now. I'll play the very beginning of it for you, but it's a really good story. And again, you can find it on the website. This pastor did something really important, I think, when Abe shared the story, is Abe asked him, "How long do I have to speak?" And the pastor said, "You're a national treasure. I'm not going to cut you off. You go as long as you want." And he spoke for 1 hour and 40 minutes. And that video's online. You can watch it if you really get into Abe's story. But because he had extra time, his telling of the chicken story was particularly good. I'm just going to play like 2 seconds of it so you can hear his voice here, and then you can watch it on your own.
So I took care of the chicken, and they get them and get it and big. The officer came by and took them and ate them. And I said to myself, we have no chicken. If somebody had chicken in my town, they were a millionaire. You couldn't buy any chicken. Chicken was a rich man's dinner. A beef or lamb, well, for the wrong reason or not, I don't want chicken. But chicken, forget about it. I said to myself, how do I take a chicken home?
So he describes putting a chicken in his pants. And it's a very funny story. You have to watch it at some point. If we have time at the end, I'll play it for you. But the Nazi who's guarding the people who work in the palace notices something moving in Abe's pants and says, "What's going on?" And Abe says, "Well, I couldn't lie to him. I have a chicken." The soldier looked the other way and let him go. What could the soldier have done for stealing? Shot him. You don't mess with the Nazis, right? And so Abe told the chicken story wherever he spoke. I was given these 3 boxes, not those 3 boxes, but 3 boxes of things related to Abe's Holocaust work after he passed away by his family. And there was a stack of index cards. And on one of the index cards, somebody wrote, "I was struck by your chicken story." it was interesting to see that at the beginning of the war, some Germans still treated you as a human being. Thank you again for speaking to us about your experiences. So he told the chicken story, hundreds of times around North Carolina. He took it on the road once to upstate New York, where his son is a professor at the State University of New York at Delhi. That's Abe with his son, and that's his son Joe's wife, Jane. And Jane was at this talk where Abe spoke for 2 hours at this university, and she's going to describe the tail end of, at the end of that talk, what happened. Again, that's Pam, who you've met, and that's Pam's brother, Joe. But this is Jane describing the end of the talk.
Was, he answered questions, as probably he always did, from the students. And one of the students said, how can you be so joyful? You just told us a story with horrific things that you experienced, and yet you were able to find happiness. How could you be so happy after what you lived through? And he didn't answer right away, and I thought, oh boy, I'm sure he's got that question before, but he didn't answer right away. He just stood there. And then he said, I am just happy. I'm just be happy. And that was how it ended. I was just like, yeah. And he obviously did. Yeah.
A very positive guy, put a positive spin on lots of things. It's really hard to put a positive spin on being separated from your family. And that's what happened to him when he was 13. This is his Uncle Jacob, who became his uncle because he married his mother's sister, Leah. And Uncle Jacob was part of a thing called the Judenrat. Is that a term you guys have learned? Some of you maybe so. The Judenrat is like the intermediary between the Nazis who've occupied an area and the Jews who live in a town. And the Judenrat, if there's food to be distributed, it goes through the Judenrat. Maybe they take some extra for their family, but they make sure it gets out to people. But similarly, if there's a need, the Nazis say, hey, we want something from the Jews in this town that we're occupying. In this case, they wanted 1 worker per household. And in the Holocaust literature, this is called a choiceless choice. There's no good option here. Abe was 13, so he doesn't know exactly what the conversation was, but Uncle Jacob is talking to Abe's father, and it probably went something like, hey, if I take you, Abe's father, Abe's mother was kind of sick at the time, and Abe's father was sneaking out of the ghetto at night to steal potatoes and do things to keep the family alive. If we take Abe's father, the family starves. Does that make sense? So what we're going to do is, when I come tomorrow and I have to take somebody from your household, don't be here, and I'll take Abe. And Abe doesn't know this plan, but his Uncle Jacob comes, is his favorite uncle, gave him his first haircut, taught him to play the violin. He's like, oh, great, where are we going? Uncle Jacob doesn't tell him where they're going, and Abe goes to turn away, and Uncle Jacob grabs him by the wrist and says, you're coming with me. Put him on a truck that looks something like that. He's 13 years old, never saw his mother, father, and little sister again. Didn't get a chance to pack anything. He wore the shirt, he was wearing a shirt and a pair of pants. He wore those clothes for 2 years. You may have seen those, the uniforms with the stripes. He got that at the very tail end of the first camp that he was at, called Radom. And a truck took him. He'd never been this far away from home before. It's about 20 miles to the south. And I'm not going to take a lot of time to go into daily life in a slave labor camp, but it's very difficult. They wake you up in the morning, count you. If they're in a good mood, the counting takes 15 minutes. If they're not, it could take 2 hours. In the burning hot sun, in the freezing cold winter. You then get a slice of bread. Coffee's in quotes because it's not real coffee. It's like made with chicory or something. You march to the factory, do a full day of work. You march back. If you know the person ladling out the soup, you might get a piece of vegetable. If not, if they don't go deep for you, you just get broth. Rinse and repeat. For 2 years, he managed to survive doing that. His job at the factory was making pistols. He made the part where the bullets went through up there. He's a 13, 14-year-old kid. Y'all can relate. You're almost that old. And if he messed up, they saw that as hurting the German war effort, and he got whipped. Right? And so he had to learn really fast how to be useful to the Germans and not mess up making those pistols. A way that he was helped to survive in Radom was he had another uncle and aunt. This is a picture of them much later. They moved to Waterloo, Iowa, and survived the Holocaust. But his Uncle Joe was a tailor, and because of that, he could make uniforms for the Nazis. He was useful to them, and he got extra rations of bread. And sometimes he shared those extra rations of bread with Abe, and because Abe had so few calories coming in, that extra ration of bread probably helped save his life. So after 2 years in Ranum, the Red Army, the Soviets is approaching from the east. They want to, they destroy the factory, right, and just march their slave laborers 55 miles to a train station. They get on the train, and the train takes those 2,000 people to Auschwitz. Have y'all seen this before? This is the gate to Auschwitz. That means, it's German for work sets you free, which it didn't really, but that was the message they wanted to give to calm people down a little bit. See that B? It's upside down. Right? When you make a B, they're either even or the big one's on the bottom. If you Google Polish blacksmith resistance Arbeitmacht B, that was done on purpose as an act of resistance. And the B got a statue. I'm not sure if it's still up, but in Germany, they had that up, and it's like to be remembered, right? So if you can't resist with armed forces because you get shot, there are little ways that you can say, I'm not okay with what's going on. And that's what that B represents. So this is a picture of people at Auschwitz. These folks have luggage with them. Abe and his crew wouldn't have had luggage, but it would have been a similar scene on the platform at Auschwitz. And there's somebody at Auschwitz who would be determining, this guy here, if you could work. So if you're over 16 and under 40 and in pretty good shape, they'd put you to work. If you're older or younger, like see this old woman and this young kid, they're going to get sent in that line. That is not the line you want to be in. They're going to get sent to what they're told is a shower, but is really a gas chamber. And they're going to be murdered, and their bodies are going to come out and be incinerated within about 3 hours of arriving at Auschwitz. We're back to that systematic nature of the Holocaust, but this is that bump later in 1944 or so. Abe was short and was one of the younger people there, and his friends were concerned that even if he said he was, he was 15 at the time, if he said he was 16, they weren't going to believe him. So what they did was they lifted him up in the air to make him appear taller. And this is Abe remembering that moment. This is a 2-hour interview. It's the one moment where he cries. And as an adult, he never cried. But this is him remembering what happened on the platform at Auschwitz.
The next thing we knew, at least I knew, was the train stopped and they opened the door. And they still didn't give us any water or food. A few of them died in the train. Who died, I don't know. Because they took him away. They carried him out. I don't think there was a stretcher. They carried him they carried him by the arms and legs. And we had to line up. And all the women to one side, the men to the other side, and the older people to one side, and the younger people to one side. But I was the smallest one, so. They cooked him in it. His name is Maya Flecke. He was taller than that, and he's alive today. And another fellow, I don't remember who was on the other side, picked me up by my arms. So I should look taller.
They're risking their lives by doing that, right? And so, remember I told you, Abe told the audience how good he was at hide and seek? He also did something strange. He said, I want 2 volunteers. These 2 guys volunteered. And he said, I want a short person. This woman volunteered. And he had them lift her up in the air and didn't tell anybody why he was doing this. He just said, let's give him a round of applause. And again, I think people thought he was crazy. This is Meyer Flecker. This is another tall person risking his life, and that's Abe when they lifted him up in the air on the platform. Abe, when they moved to California, Abe and Shirley stopped in Kansas City to visit Meyer Flecker, who's still taller. He carried this picture of Meyer Flecker with him just about everywhere he spoke. And a friend of mine used that as a model for this character, and this picture of Abe as a model for that character. And she made this 45-second stop motion animation. There's no words, so you gotta watch it really carefully. It's for 45 seconds. You ready? All right, here we go. Pretty good, yeah? Took her like 80 hours to make that. She used to make the world and move it little bits at a time. We don't have time to turn to your neighbor, but what's something that stood out for you in that animation? Maybe just get a few folks. Often when I ask that question, did the dog stick out to you? The dogs often make people feel kind of unsafe and it's a little chaotic. The sky is not a normal color. Why is the sky not a normal color? Yeah. Exactly, the smoke in the air from the burning of the bodies, right? So there's a lot in that video. Hopefully you can watch that. Abe's family his son was touched, and he put that picture on his New Year's card, right? Those are Abe's grandchildren, and some great grandchildren up in there. So Abe survived the selection at Auschwitz. After that, they put him on the car, and it sat there for 10 hours. Because it wasn't a priority for them to move them along. Like I said, that was a 5 or 6 day journey. When he got to a camp called Wahoo, that had double barbed wire outside of it, his job was lifting heavy bags of concrete. If you dropped your concrete, the SS would machine gun you to death. And he remembered having to walk around bodies of people that were left there. The war was not going well for the Nazis at this point. If you can't help us, we don't need you. The Nazis kept very good records. This is Abe's arrival at Wahoo, and this is when he went to a camp called Hessenthal, which was not far away. And his job there was easier, but the weather was worse. If you've studied World War II, this is the Battle of the Bulge. Very cold winter. I feel bad for those soldiers, and they have much better clothing than Abe and his crew would have had. And some people have asked, did some people die because of the weather? Yeah, they did. A lot of people got frostbite on their toes. And Abe's work was protecting the German infrastructure, so like filling in bomb craters on airport runways and repairing railroad ties. And then, as you heard earlier, he was on a train headed for Dachau when he was liberated, when the train was bombed on either side. I hope you'll take time to listen to his full testimony on the cattle car. This is not an actual soldier who he met, but he was part of the group that helped liberate these 3 Holocaust survivors from North Carolina, and they did an article about that in People magazine some years ago. Like I said, spent 2 years in displaced persons camps, one called Feldafing, the other called Forenwald. He learned some carpentry skills he never really used. He had a bicycle at Forenwald. And then he came to the US. We talked about the Statue of Liberty already. Maybe some of you will be motivated to make some art about Abe. I'd love if you do. Please share it with me. I'll put it on the website. And when he came to New York, he stayed in a hotel room near Times Square. They asked him, do you want to go to Connecticut or California? And he said, he doesn't speak English very well. He's like, which one's further away? They said, California. He said, I'll go with Connecticut. And so he met his wife, Shirley, there. They got married. He joined the Connecticut National Guard and then the U.S. Army. When his son was born, he went in the reserves, so he didn't fight in the Korean War, but his unit did. He became a U.S. citizen in 1952, took his family to see the Statue of Liberty in 1956, and then in 1964, he purchased a bake shop called Richard's Bake Shop in Wethersfield, Connecticut. And that's him as a proud business owner. That's his business card. That's the challah you saw earlier. This is him entertaining some Girl Scouts, it looks like. And he knew what it was like to be hungry, and he taught his kids to make sure that if he could do anything about it, he would try to make sure people wouldn't go hungry.
And it wasn't a back door. A back door, regularly, somebody would knock on the back door.
I remember being there one day. I used to get up early in the morning and get the bakers, and somebody knocked on the door. And I was doing things to help him, so it's kind of in my program. When I saw him went to the door with bags of food, bread and rolls and pastries, and he gave it to somebody, and I said, "Dad, what was that all about?" And he goes, "Somebody was hungry, and nobody that's hungry that comes to his back door is going to go away without food." And made me realize he did that all the time.
And it wasn't a back door.
It was
The back door, regularly, somebody would knock on the back door. And he didn't say a word. He just looked and he goes, "Oh." And,
Yeah.
Here.
What was the name of the bakery?
Richard's Bake Shop.
And he was Richard.
Or
Or anybody else that they would call him.
So, like I said, they moved to California. He worked at another bakery that catered to the Hollywood set. He once delivered a cake to Steven Spielberg. He liked to tell people that, so now you know that fact. He was still volunteering at a bakery in Raleigh.
And I still got a part-time job as a baker. And I'm still working today. I'm still rolling in dough, but it's not green. It's different color. Yeah.
That joke didn't land with you, sorry. This is him on a cruise. This is him at his granddaughter Katie's wedding in Hawaii. After his wife died, he mourned for a few years. Then he met this woman, Judy, at his synagogue, and he had a girlfriend for the last years of his life. And Katie and he had a really special relationship. And this is a video Katie sent me recently of her baking with her grandfather.
minutes to rise?
Yeah, well, then it depends, probably about 20 minutes.
They're so pretty.
You can hear in her voice that she's quite fond of him. She had a baby boy named Billy soon after Abe passed away. That's Joe, Abe's son, holding his grandson, what would have been Abe's great-grandson. And Katie said something that struck me as particularly powerful. She said she wished that Billy could have heard Abe's classic, joking, cheerful voice. And I think those are three perfect adjectives to describe Abe. And what makes that even more remarkable that he was able to be that way is that he had nightmares on a regular basis. And in that box where I had the index cards, there were DVDs of some of his speeches. And he wouldn't talk about this unless you asked him, but some students at a school in Raleigh said, "Do you still have nightmares?" And this was his response to that question.
At least 2-3 times a week. I wake up sweating. I see the people who got killed. I see the people who I walked over and they were dead. Everything comes before me at night.
So the fact that he went in that cattle car when he regularly has nightmares without even thinking about the Holocaust is remarkable to me. He wouldn't have told me this, but his daughter revealed to me that it took him 24 hours to recover from being in that cattle car, just all the memories that came back to him. I'm going to give the second to last word to his grandson, Jefferson. This is at his bar mitzvah. And so he's 13 years old here. Abe is, I believe, 67 years old here. And I showed Jefferson the same clip that I showed you guys earlier where Abe says, "Don't hate." And then you'll see it again, but this is Jefferson's response to that clip.
Hate anybody. I can tell you don't like somebody, but don't hate. That's my motto for the kids.
Yeah, that clip you played is rings like really deep with me because it seems like he's concentrated really hard on how to phrase that, and that's the exact way that he told me when I was much younger and before he was so frail. He was always like one of the most vibrant grandpas I've ever seen. He was always walking around and doing things and handy, so it's interesting to see him in that clip. It's not how I really remember him, but it's still beautiful. And it's very apparent that he wanted to reiterate that message. Yeah, tell him you don't like him, not that you hate him. That's so classic. Classic Abe.
So Yehuda Bauer is a famous Holocaust historian, and when they had the first Holocaust Remembrance Day in 2006 at the United Nations, he said the Jews gave the world the 10 Commandments, but after the Holocaust you have to add 3 more commandments. That thou shalt not be a perpetrator, thou shalt not be a victim, and thou shalt never but never be a bystander. And so I don't know if you guys know this term, but what's the opposite of a bystander? An upstander, right? Someone who's not going to sit around when they see some injustice. And so what I'll leave you with, and I'd love to entertain questions from you guys, is if you see hate or discrimination, take some inspiration from Abe to be an upstander, not a bystander, and do something. Pre-COVID, people would come up to him and hug him and say, what can I do, after they heard him speak? And this is what he told one group.
And I said, do me a favor, speak. If you see somebody is getting hurt or bullying, speak up. Don't let them do that.
Speak up. Don't let them do that. And that is the story of my friend, Abe. We have about 11 minutes left, and we have microphones. So I would love to hear some of your questions.
So if you would like to ask a question, please come up to one of the 2 microphones that are up near the front, and you are welcome to ask any questions. Don't be shy.
Nothing. Yeah. Do you want to?
What did they live on to survive with food?
At what time period? So in the ghetto, they had whatever they could get. That's why his mother wanted him to make mushroom soup, so there wasn't much food there. Like I said, at the camp, it was awful food, right? Like they would get a slice of bread that often would have sawdust in it. It was not good bread. And then they would get a very light lunch as they were working a 12-hour day. And then, like I said, when they got back, there'd be a big vat that had like some vegetable scraps and stuff in it. You were lucky if you got a vegetable scrap. A lot of people would just get the water, the broth that tasted a little bit like vegetable. So that's why his uncle, do you remember what his uncle did that was useful to the Germans? He was a tailor. That extra food helped Abe survive almost certainly. But yeah, it's remarkable, and that's why he was a walking skeleton, because he had almost no food for 3 years when he was in the various camps. Yeah.
What type of beds would they sleep in?
So it varied some, but it would be like a bunk bed often, 3 layers of no mattress, just wood, and they were given a blanket, and that's it. And 2 or 3 people would share a bunk. Some of the bunks would even be more crowded in other camps, but as Abe described it, it was like 2 or 3 people, and it was not very pleasant. But they were so tired, they would just kind of go to sleep. He had a friend who told stories at night, and that helped them forget where they were. But after working a day like that and having that little food, they would just go to sleep from exhaustion. Does that answer the question you're asking? Yeah? Yeah. Oh, we got a big
Were the camps worse than prisons?
Were the camps and the prisons were, there were slave labor camps, and there were also, I guess there'd be prisons for some like prisoners of war and things like that. I think all of the conditions were pretty bad. I'm really not sure I wouldn't want to be in either one of them, but I'm not an expert, so I don't want to venture about that. Yep. Or you came back.
What type of houses did they live in?
At what time at what time period? You mean in the camps? I mean, it looked like that picture I showed you. This is not the camp that Abe was at, but it would look. This is another camp, but his camp would have looked pretty similar to this, where it looked about like that. So that you can see there's 3 layers, 1, 2, 3 that people are sleeping on. There's just one blanket, no sheets or anything like that, and there'd be lice crawling all over the place. It was very, very unpleasant. And so there was just like 4 walls and a roof, and very hastily put together. That's the conditions that people would live in the camps. Yeah. Why was it called Richard's Bakery instead of Amy's Bakery? Because he bought it from a guy named Richard, right? He may have not bought it from Richard. Like somebody named Richard made the bakery. That was the name it was known as. And so some people in Wethersfield referred to it as Abe's Bakery, but he never changed the thing up there, and that's why. Yeah, good question. Yep.
Do you think they'd ever sleep on the blankets, or do you think they use blankets?
Well, keep in mind you're sharing with 1 or 2 other people. So yeah, I mean, if it was cold, you'd all kind of try to share under the blanket, and yeah, maybe you're saying to get a little bit of cushion. Yeah, maybe, sure. You do the best you can with what you're given. Yep.
Did Abe ever see those people again when the people who helped him look taller?
Yes. Yeah, well, not necessarily the person on the other side, but Meyer Flecker. I had that picture of him where he, when he moved to California, he stopped and saw, this is Abe and Meyer Flecker in 1975. So Meyer Flecker and his younger brother, Abe Flecker, Abe did see them. This is hard for you guys to relate to, but back in the 1970s, to make a long-distance phone call cost a lot of money. So he knew they were there, but they didn't talk hardly at all. He just saw them at that one time. His younger brother was named Abe Flecker, and that's who Abe went back to Galliver's with when he went to see the palace that it was redone, but when they went, the Flecker house was still there, but Abe's house was gone. Yep.
Did he ever get to see his parents again?
Never saw his parents again. He's pretty sure they were sent to Treblinka, and I can, if you want, I can get you evidence of why I think that happened as well, but no, he never saw them again. Yep.
What type of shoes did they wear usually?
Whatever shoes they had when they got in, right? And so if somebody died and they were near your shoe size, you would take their shoes, if you could, right? And so and Abe's a growing person like you people are. The shoes he came in with would stop fitting him after a couple of years because he's growing. He's not growing as much as you guys are because he had fewer calories. But yeah, whatever you could get. Yep.
When girls were chosen to be in labor, did they not wore their hair just in rat's nest? Did they have anything to comb it with?
I don't know about all the time, but a lot of women, when they got to a camp, their heads would be shaved. Would be one of the first things that would happen to them. So that wouldn't be an issue, and it's really hard. People have the experience of not even being able to recognize their mother or their sister because you look so different if you don't have hair. A little bit with men, but more so with women.
Also, were they did they have any toothbrushes, or were their teeth just?
You do what you can. If you care about that, which you want to, right? Because you don't want something bad to happen to your teeth. You could use a stick or something. You do the best you can, but no, there would be no toothbrushes or anything like that. The fact that you're thinking about that, though, shows that you're really trying to empathize with what their life was like, which is really important. So thank you. Yep.
In the years he was at the camps, did he ever have one shower or a bath or anything?
Only when it rained. Right? If it rained, they would get water in that way. But
Remember how long he had to wear the same clothes too.
Yeah, 2 years. And then he finally got a striped uniform later on. One time his daughter was going to school and she was wearing a striped uniform, like a striped shirt, and he said to her, "Pam, can you change?" Like that brings back memories for me. And out of respect to her father, she did change, but he didn't get that until later on. Yeah, thanks.
How could the soldiers tell that they were Jews?
How could the soldiers tell they were Jews? Excellent question. So if we go back to the definition, right? If you look at me, do you think I'm Jewish? No, I am. You can't tell, right? Like my last name is Goldberg, and so that might be a bit of a tip-off. But if we go to this definition of what was the Holocaust, there were collaborators. So if I was living in Białobrzegi, say, and I said, "Oh no, I'm not Jewish," somebody who knew me would say, "Yeah, he is." Right? And not all the time. There were some people who tried to help and hide Jews. But if, the people in the towns knew and they had records of who had gone to synagogue, and it's a small enough town that they would know. How are we on time? We're good? All right, yeah.
Do they ever get to take showers or something?
Only when it rains. Yeah, there was no shower facility. He was, yeah, very, very dirty. Yep.
Did all of the Jews end up having the symbol tattoo on their arm?
No, Abe didn't. The only Jews who had the tattoo on their arm, that was a device used at Auschwitz-Birkenau. And so that's if you look into that, that's where those are from. But there were about 10,000 people who were liberated from that camp. So there are a lot of people who have that tattoo. But Abe and many other survivors didn't have that because they weren't at Auschwitz. Yep.
When he was wearing his clothes for 2 years, did he ground them?
Did he? Probably. Yeah, I never had a chance to really ask him details about that, but I think probably they started fitting less well. It would be strange if they didn't, right? Yep.
What did they do with all the Jews that they killed?
I mean, depends where you are, right? If you're at Auschwitz, they had crematoria, and they would burn the bodies. There were some places where they had big burial pits. There were some places where, as Abe described, if you dropped a bag of concrete, they left your body there. So different things, but you need to do some research. It's hard to generalize where all the bodies went. Yep.
Did they keep people in classes?
I'm sorry, did they keep people?
With classes?
Was eyesighted.
Oh, if you couldn't work, they would not be happy with you. But there's a whole collection of. There's one warehouse at Auschwitz called Canada, where they have a whole room full of eyeglasses they took from people. So anything that might be of value, they would use for the German war effort. But I'm not sure. I see what you're saying. If your vision was so bad that you weren't useful as a worker, it would not be good for you.
To kind of close it out, I have one more question for you, and it's more about you. What was the experience like for Abe to ask you personally to tell his story?
Yeah. No, it's okay. No, it was and is an incredible. Good question. It was and is an incredible honor that he asked me. I've often been asked by students, would you tell his story even if he hadn't asked you? And I don't know, because he did, right? But I had at that point invested a lot of time and effort learning the story. I wanted his story to get out there, so I think I might have, but he did ask me, and again, I didn't know really what that meant, right? And so, and then COVID hit 2 months after that. So it was, what's important, what are we gonna do? We homeschooled our son for 8th grade, and I spent time researching this story, and like I said, this is the 185th or 6th time that I've shared this story. I'm working a book about it, and I think the world's a better place if more people know Abe's story. So.
Ladies and gentlemen, let's thank our guests for sharing the story.
dismiss you a little bit at a time. You're gonna grab your stuff and you're gonna go